Welcome back for another Summer Blockbuster. This summer, I'm going behind the scenes of some of the biggest summer blockbuster movies. Today, we're going to a galaxy far, far away, and we'll discover how Star Wars became a worldwide pop culture phenomenon. If you're new here, welcome. Each week, I create a new look using Color Street nail strips, and this summer, join me and go behind the scenes to see how these movies were made. If you're interested in unique color combos and want to learn some movie magic facts, I would highly recommend that you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Star Wars was created by George Walton Lucas Jr., or as we know him best, George Lucas. George was born in 1944 in Modesto, California, and in 1955, his family visited Disneyland during the opening week, and George will remain enthusiastic about the park. Foreshadowing? He was also interested in comics, science fiction, including sci-fi shows like Flash Gordon. In his younger years, race car driving was his passion, but due to a pretty bad accident resulting in his car flipping just days before his high school graduation, he lost interest in racing as a career. George attended Modesto Junior College, where he studied anthropology and literature. But during this time, he also started shooting car races with 8mm camera. He would then transfer to the University of Southern California School of Cinematic Arts. While at USC, he became friends with future collaborator Steven Spielberg. Lucas was deeply influenced with the Filmatic Expression course, which concentrated on non-narrative elements of film form like color, light, movement, space, and time. In 1969, Lucas co-founded a studio with legendary Francis Ford Coppola. They went on to produce THX 1138, which was a full-length feature of Lucas's short film Electronic Labyrinth THX 1136 4EB, but it was not a success. After the failure, George created his own company, Lucasfilm Limited. And in 1971, he had an idea for a space fantasy film. Though originally his idea was to adapt Flash Gordon comics and bring it to the big screen, but he was disappointed to find out that they would not sell him the rights to Flash Gordon. George said, quote, "Well, I'll just invent my own." In 1973, after the release of American Graffiti, Lucas had turned his attention to the space opera with the tentative title, The Star Wars. He began writing 8 hours a day for 5 days a week, taking small notes, inventing odd names, and assigning them possible characterizations. Lucas would discard many of these ideas by the time the final script was written, but would include several names and places in the final script or in its sequels. Lucas and producer Gary Kurtz presented the film's 13-page treatment to Universal Pictures, the studio that had just financed American Graffiti. While they agreed it could be a very commercial venture, they had doubts about Mr. Lucas's ability to pull it off. Coppola brought the project to a division of Paramount Pictures he ran with fellow directors, but they questioned Lucas's ability to direct the film and ultimately declined. Interestingly enough, Walt Disney Production also turned down the film. Lucas pursued Alan Ladd Jr., the head of 20th Century Fox, in June of 1973 completed the deal to write and direct the film. Now that Lucas had the deal, he had to finish the story in the script. At this stage, he had added elements like the Sith, the Death Star, and a general by the name Anakin Starkiller. In the second draft, Lucas introduced the young hero Luke Starkiller, and Anakin would become Luke's father, a wise Jedi. During production, the name Starkiller would be changed to Skywalker, and the film title would change to Star Wars, and removing the. A mystical energy field known as the Force was also added to the story. He also envisioned a smuggler, Han Solo, as a large green-skinned monster with gills. And Han Solo's co-pilot, Chewbacca, was based on Lucas's dog, Indiana. At the end of the draft, it was over 200 pages long and would lead him to make the decision to split the story up into multiple films spanning over multiple trilogies. Lucas recruited many conceptual designers, including Colin Cantwell and Ralph McQuarrie. Colin, who worked on 2001: A Space Odyssey, was to conceptualize the initial spacecraft models. Ralph McQuarrie was to visualize the characters, costumes, props, and scenery. McQuarrie's pre-production paintings of certain scenes for Lucas's early screenplay draft helped 20th Century Fox visualize the film, which positively influenced their decision to fund the project. Lucas described a used future concept to the production designers. in which all devices, ships, and buildings to do with Tatooine or the Rebels to look aged and dirty, as opposed to the sleek designs of the Empire. After learning the visual effects department of 20th Century Fox had been disbanded, Lucas formed his own visual effects company, Industrial Light and Magic, in 1975. When it came to casting, Lucas favored casting young actors who lacked long experience. First up, we have our hero, Luke Skywalker, or Star Killer, while casting. Charles Martin Smith, who had just worked with George in American Graffiti, auditioned for the role, as well as William Catt. But the role would go to Mark Hamill, who found the dialogue to be extremely odd, but since he chose to read it sincerely, he was cast over everyone else. Harrison Ford auditioned for the role of Han Solo, but Lucas initially rejected him because he wanted new faces. Ford had also just worked with Lucas on American Graffiti. Instead, Ford would read the lines with other actors in the auditions, but would eventually win Lucas over and was cast instead of a number of well-known actors by today's standards, like Kurt Russell, Christopher Walken, and even Bill Murray. Many young actresses auditioned for the role of Princess Leia. Carrie Fisher won over everyone, and she was cast under one condition, that she would lose 10 pounds for the role. When it came to Obi-Wan Kenobi, Lucas went against his rule of casting unknowns. He felt that the role needed an established actor. At this time, sci-fi movies were quite cheap as effects go, and Alec Guinness was one of the few cast members who believed the film would be successful. When it came to Darth Vader, there were actually two actors cast. David Prowse was cast as the Sith Lord for both the voice and the physical role initially, but after hearing the West Country English accent of Prowse, Lucas wanted to go a different route. Orson Welles was originally intended for the voice role, but Lucas determined that Welles' voice would have been too familiar to audiences. Lucas turned to, at this time less known, James Earl Jones. Filming. Originally, Lucas envisioned the planet of Tatooine, where much of the film would take place, as a jungle planet. Gary Kurtz traveled to the Philippines to scout locations. However, because of the idea of spending months filming in the jungle, it made Lucas itchy. The director redefined his vision and made Tatooine a desert planet. Tunisia, near the Sahara Desert, was chosen as the ideal location. It took 8 weeks for the construction crew to transform the desert into the desired setting. And on March 22nd, 1976, filming began in the Tunisian desert for the scenes on Tatooine, but the project faced several problems. Lucas fell behind schedule in the first few weeks of shooting due to malfunctioning props and electronic breakdowns. Moreover, a rare Tunisian rainstorm struck the country, which further disrupted filming. Abnormal radio signals caused by the Tunisian sands made the radio control R2-D2 models run out of control. Kenny Baker would say, "It was incredibly grateful each time R2 would actually work." After 2.5 weeks of filming in Tunisia, production was moved to a town near London to film the interior scenes. This studio was chosen over other options in Hollywood. Star Wars required the use of 9 different sound stages simultaneously, which most studios could not accommodate. Initially, Fox approved $8 million for the project, but then it was obvious that $8 million was not going to do it. For 2 weeks, Lucas and his crew didn't really do anything except pull together the new budget figures. At the same time, production fell behind schedule. Ladd told Lucas he had to finish the project within a week or he'd be forced to shut down production. The delays increased the budget from $8 million to $11 million. After they got the go-ahead to increase the budget, the crew split into 3 units, with those 3 units led by Lucas, Kurtz, and the production supervisor, Robert Watts. Under the new system, the project met the studio's deadlines. Star Wars was originally slated to release in Christmas of 1976. However, due to all the production delays, it was pushed to be released in mid-1977. Meanwhile, Industrial Light and Magic was struggling to achieve the unprecedented special effects. The company had spent half of its budget in 4 shots that Lucas deemed unacceptable. With hundreds of incomplete shots, ILM was forced to finish a year's work in 6 months. Lucas inspired ILM by editing together aerial dogfights from old war films, which enhanced the pace of the scenes. Sound designer Ben Burt had created a library of sounds that Lucas referred to as organic soundtracks. Blaster sounds were modified recordings of steel cables under tension being struck. The lightsaber sound effect was developed by combining a hum of an idle interlocked motors and an aged movie projector, and interference caused by a television set and a shielded microphone. Darth Vader's breathing was achieved by Burt breathing through a mask of a scuba regulator implanted with a microphone. The soundtrack was next. On recommendation of his friend Steven Spielberg, Lucas hired composer John Williams. Williams had worked with Spielberg on the film Jaws, for which he won an Academy Award. He wanted a grand musical score for Star Wars. In March of 1977, Williams conducted the London Symphony Orchestra to record the Star Wars soundtrack in just 12 days. Remember when I mentioned that Lucas wanted to remake Flash Gordon? Well, we know that Lucas could not get the rights to Flash Gordon, but he was inspired by many elements from the show, including the conflict between the rebels and the Imperial forces, wipes between scenes, and the famous opening crawl that begins in each film, which I mentioned in my Lightyear video linked here. The decision was made to release Star Wars on the Wednesday before Memorial Day weekend. On May 25th, 1977, Star Wars was released in fewer than 32 theaters. It immediately broke box office records and joined Jaws in one of the first blockbuster films. In the first 6 days, it earned over $2.5 million and was the #1 movie in box office for the first 3 weeks. It replaced Jaws as the highest earning film in North America in just 6 months, and would eventually earn over $220 million during its initial run. But just like we learned with Jaws, Star Wars would remain the highest grossing film of all time and until 1983, with the release of another Steven Spielberg film, E.T. Because of the film being so successful, this allowed George Lucas to continue his story and finish his 3 sets of trilogies. On October 30th, 2012, Disney announced a deal to acquire Lucasfilm for over $4 billion. Lucasfilm had previously collaborated with Walt Disney's Imagineering division to create theme park attractions. Walt Disney Parks and Resorts expanded from just a ride to an entire immersive land, Galaxy's Edge, at both Disney's Hollywood Studios in Florida and Disneyland Park in California. Thanks for hanging out with me today. I hope you enjoyed this journey to a galaxy far, far away. And we'll see you for the next one.